in your last video, which I commented on, so you know that I watched it. You said something about it being this article that I want to talk about being yet another article about Jordan Peterson. I didn't know if that was your comment about how a lot of my content has been about the response to Jordan Peterson, but I do a lot of Jordan Peterson centered content. So,
Did you say Jordan Peterson scented?
Centered, centered. I was just interested because I did think about that, and even though it turns out that's not what you were saying, it still interested me that I had to ask myself, why am I so interested in not just Jordan Peterson as a person, but also the meta Jordan Peterson phenomenon of the people who are interested in him, and also these articles that keep coming out against him that just fascinate me. It seems like, to me at least, one of the most interesting things that are going on in the last few years. And I don't know. Do you know any response to that? What is so fascinating about this?
What's your guess? What's your guess about why people find him so fascinating to talk about, even if it's just to completely, try to deplatform him and call him a bunch of names like the article we're going to be talking about?
Well, obviously I'm biased, but I think it's because he's got a lot of really interesting things to say that are dangerous to some people. He questions a lot of very strongly held beliefs that are very popular at the moment, and people have a reason to want to be able to discredit him and tell people that there's no reason to listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's interesting because when they do that, it's very often that they do the same tact that this article does, where they basically say that his audience is white men, and that in and of itself is a flag. That's like some sort of, dog whistle or foghorn about this man, that white men are flocking to him, which,
young white men, which are especially,
filled with testosterone and all that privilege, and watching their ancestral homelands be taken over by multiculturalism or whatever the narrative is on that. But that kind of bothers me because I've been to a couple of his events now, and watching, being involved on Twitter, I see that maybe the majority of his followers, or the people who pay attention to him and go through his stuff, are young white men, but that doesn't mean that they all are. Like, there's a lot of women, and there's a lot of people of a lot of different races. So it seems like you're kind of, when you criticize him by constantly aligning him with this one demographic, you're basically shutting out of the conversation all these other demographics that you yourself, and a lot of these articles, the people that write these articles, are nominally standing for this category and that category and every other category but the young white man, heterosexual and gender conforming, etc. So I wonder, does that kind of frustrate you, or do you just kind of?
I'm just fascinated by it. I mean, it's I've heard it said that when you start to see, I suppose you'd call it your enemies, although I don't consider Laurie Penny my enemy, but when you see your enemies start to attack random, make ad hominems and just make random attacks on you, it's kind of a good indicator that they don't have anything of actual substance to say. But
they go on and on and on. Like this is like one of the larger pieces, and there's this other guy, Nathan J. Robinson, who runs Current Affairs. He did a big old long write-up on Peterson, and like within the first paragraph, he's already accusing him of being a white man, like as though that in and of itself is, a bedrock that we can rest an argument on. I don't think it is. Why do people think that is a sufficient grounds for criticism?
Yeah, I actually do think she's got a lot of interesting criticisms in this article. She's got a lot to go on, other than the white man thing, but then for some reason, sort of 2/3 of the way through, she degenerates into this white man thing. Actually, I did something interesting. I've got the article open just above where your head is, and if you do Control F for the word white, and in this article it is always indicating the race white. She's not talking about some white sheets or anything. If you do Control F white, you can see along the what do you call it, the side scroll bar, you can see where it appears, and there's this chunk in the middle where there's like 10 mentions of the word white where she just goes on and on
Oh yeah, look at that.
talking about talking
Oh
about his
geez.
followers and whiteness, and you see what I mean?
Yeah,
That
I'm
big
gonna.
chunk of mentions of the word white. That's when I started noticing that she was really saying white men a lot. And
Yep.
it's like you said, she wants to, like, she has a lot of
Hmm.
fairly, I mean, not really valid criticisms, but at least some more interesting to read criticisms. And then she goes into what she tries to explain his popularity by saying that he's telling these young white men what they want to hear,
Hmm.
and sort of making them feel safe in a world that's becoming less safe for these young white guys.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's like you said, it is. She then has to explain why he's also popular among people who aren't white, people who aren't men, people who aren't straight, people who are trans, who I've seen online who like Jordan Peterson.
yeah.
She doesn't. It's just she's opening herself up to these holes in her arguments when really there was no need to do that, because she had
Mm.
some. She was actually criticizing his writing for some of it,
Yeah.
which is, that's fair game as
It
far as I'm
is.
concerned.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. There's this article in the Atlantic that's pretty short that was favorable towards Peterson and said that he made a case that Jordan Peterson, why the left is so irrationally against him, is that he is basically throwing a horseshoe into the identitarian movement, right? And then I read a criticism of that article, which goes through and does the same thing and keeps on harking on the white male thing, white male thing, white male thing. I should have the intellectual we deserve. Is that it?
Yeah, she
No.
says that a lot. Laurie Penny also uses that kind of expression, saying that he's an indicator of how awful this generation is. That
You know what? The
we
problem with
deserve
her
this.
saying that is that I went through her videos and she is not that good of a public speaker. I mean, she's getting better, but like I saw something from 2013 and she's just stumbling and choking on herself
Mm.
and there's a lot of videos, and it's probably because these videos get a lot of hits, but a lot of videos came up that kind of show her like getting trounced or denounced in these different arguments. So I wonder if by saying that Jordan Peterson's like the intellectual we deserve, if she's not kind of calling herself out. Is she the intellectual that we deserve? And another thing that I wonder why there's so much, ink or black pixels spilt on Jordan Peterson is, especially from academics and leftist or left leaning journalists and stuff, is that they kind of they think that they deserve that great of an audience. They think that their ideas are just as important for
Yeah.
the world as Jordan Peterson, and he's getting all this attention, and so maybe they can't see anything other than the white men, because they think that they deserve the attention of everybody except for the white men, and so maybe they're
Mm.
kind of blind to the fact that he's reaching people that aren't white men, and that kind of feeds into their complex or their envy of in what world does a psychologist from a Canadian university pack auditoriums of
Yeah.
3,000, 1,000 people? Like, in what world could that have possibly happened? There has to be something wrong with the world if that's what we've come to, that he's a rock star.
Yeah, I think that is part of what's fascinating as well, is that it is such a strange thing to have happened. I mean, he talks about it frequently himself, about how you wouldn't really have predicted, the success of Jordan Peterson. Even if you really liked Jordan Peterson, you wouldn't expect that he would be as interesting to people as he is.
Yeah.
But you just reminded me that I should have introduced Laurie Penny, because you hadn't heard of her before. Is that correct? Before I
Once I
read the
started
article.
researching her, I had interacted with her, but apparently she's pretty big in Britain.
Yeah, fairly. If you watch political TV or the news, she will occasionally pop up. She also goes by Penny Red, which is her Twitter handle. But I thought that was her name for a long time, because I swear that when I saw her on TV, her actual name came up underneath as Penny Red. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I was actually very surprised when you sent me that video of her doing a Q&A when she said that her book was funny. I was surprised to find out that she thought that she was funny. I didn't even notice that she was trying to be funny.
Oh no! In that clip, and maybe you can put it in the video now.
Yeah.
But that clip, she says that she's usually more funny than she is, and she's reading from the introduction to her latest
Bitch
book.
doctrine.
Yeah, the Bitch Doctrine.
Yeah.
That she did a reading of that beginning, and the introduction is, it's written right after Trump gets elected, and she's all full of sound and fury, and then she pauses. She's like, usually I'm more funny than that. Do you think that she's funny? Is she funny? Is she ever funny?
Reading back the article, I can see places where she thinks she's being funny. I mean, maybe there are some.
Okay.
I'm not trying to, egg
Yeah.
her for not being funny. It's like she's not painfully unfunny or anything. She's
Yeah.
not cringy, but I never even thought that she was trying to be funny or that she considered herself to be a funny or witty writer.
Yeah. I
I mean, you don't
wonder.
have to be interesting.
No, you don't. You don't. And I wonder how difficult it is for somebody who is working with the ideas and towards the goals that she is with being funny. I wonder how difficult it is to be funny and a feminist cultural critic, and
Yeah.
if those two things are mutually exclusive, because you don't necessarily find a lot of activists who are comedians. You find comedians that do some activism, like that HBO comedy special they used to do where they raised money for grains to go to ungrained places, but
Oh yeah, that's comic relief. We have that in
yeah.
the UK. Maybe,
Oh yeah, yeah. So
but that's
so
just comedy in the
yeah.
service of, yeah. But yeah, Jordan Peterson sometimes makes jokes. I don't think he's funny, to be honest. That's not just to disparage him. I think he's an interesting guy, but
Yeah.
he's hardly ever made me actually laugh. It's okay to not be funny. Although it does actually tie in quite nicely to the start of Laurie Penny's
Mm.
article, where she quotes a tiny part of one of Peterson's rants about the Garden of Eden and the negative female and the positive female and the
Mm-hmm.
snake and the tree. And I think she's a little bit unfair because she only quotes a tiny part of what is a much larger lecture where he explains
Mm-hmm.
what he says. Although, of course, I think when people first encounter Peterson, he is a little bit all over the place, and it is hard to see where he's going because you have to have a long attention span. And that's not me saying you have to have a very high IQ to enjoy Jordan Peterson. It's just that you get into the feel of like just waiting for a long time, thinking like, okay, well, this is going to make sense in about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But I have to, you just get used to waiting a bit. But yeah, there's really no justice in quoting just like 6 lines of something he says.
Well, yeah, that's a big problem with Jordan Peterson. I have this kind of this idea for an episode about Jordan Peterson. I always talk about this idea. I don't know if I'll ever go through it, but just to compare him, to give a Petersonian mythological interpretation of Jordan Peterson as a event, and and what I see Jordan Peterson modeling is kind of the archetype of Moses, who is the lawbringer. He's got his 12 rules for life, and he's kind of freeing a bunch of worker bees from this hive that's not serving them anymore. And they go out into the desert and they go on this this journey of individuation. And if you look at key aspects of Jordan Peterson's weaknesses, or how he's attacked at least, not necessarily how he will fall, but how he's attacked, or kind of weaknesses in his characteristics, in his character, I think they line up with Moses. One is Moses needed an interpreter, right? He had his brother Aaron interpret him. And not that Jordan Peterson is not a good speaker. He's an excellent speaker, but he does kind of stutter. He uses phrases from different disciplines and he transposes them, and he doesn't necessarily do the good job of interpreting himself. And so he can be easily taken out of context and then used to slander him. And a lot of things can be used to slander him that he says, such as that lipstick comment that Vice put out there. But they had removed that from the line of questioning. So you don't see the manner in which he's saying these ideas. He's saying, should men and women work together? He's asking these hard questions, and they just cut out and say, no, why should women wear makeup? It's only sexual. And you did a really good little episode about your relationship with adorning yourself or presenting yourself to the world.
I'm not sure about that, about the interpreter thing. I haven't actually. I mean, maybe one day we will get an Aaron for Jordan Peterson, but at the moment, I think he's. I don't know. I think he does a good job of explaining himself if you just read around it. Although Laurie Penny says that she never got around to understanding him, no matter how hard she tries and no matter how much she reads and that. And I wonder how much of that's down to a kind of cognitive dissonance or like motivated reasoning, or whether he's just not explaining it in a way that she can understand.
Well, see, this is the thing with this is the strength and the weakness of mythological thinking, or the poetic, metaphorical mode of making sense of the world. Is that, and I'm going to quote from, well, I'm going to misquote Jonathan Peugeot, who's Greek Orthodox icon carver, and he says that the Christian doctrine of and the iconography of the Greek Orthodox Church and perhaps the Catholic Church too is meant to appeal to the people who are not intellectuals, just the proletariat or the proles or just that lowest level of understanding. It presents ideas where they can grasp it, but as you go through and you train yourself and you look at the nuances of it, these symbols, they they break down into more and more complex arguments. Now, maybe Laurie Penny, we don't know if Laurie Penny is just adverse to that way of thinking, if she's kind of lying and says that she doesn't really understand it. But if you're commanding 3,000 sold out stadiums like Jordan Peterson is, he's able to hit a bunch of different levels in that. So a lot of people are making sense with him. And her argument here is that there's not a lot of sense to be made and that he is kind of covering up his tracks. Like, no, he's the man behind a curtain. And towards the end, she does kind of backtrack a little bit and say that she doesn't necessarily think that he is...
She says he's not being deceptive. He's sort of buying his own...
Yeah.
Or should say buying his own wares, or he's consuming his own supply, as it were.
Yeah. So she does she's nice on that, but...
Yeah, as much as people aren't going to like me saying this, I think she's got a very rational way of thinking, although I don't mean that as a compliment. I mean that she's got a scientific way of thinking, as most people do. And if you go into Jordan Peterson with a scientific mindset and not a mythological one, it can be hard to make sense of him, definitely. And I think that's part of the Sam Harris Jordan Peterson argument that went on that he's been having with Sam Harris, whether the world does make sense scientifically or mythologically, or whether there's room for both, or whether both are needed, or that sort of thing. That's really oversimplifying it. But I think it's really interesting that for most of life, people, if they're not religious, they do get by with this scientific way of thinking where stories are just entertainment. And Jordan Peterson definitely was the first person I ever saw who thought of stories as more than just stories, but as descriptive, rules for life, or just, demonstrations of how to embody yourself in the world and all of that interesting stuff.
Yeah. Well, where do you fall on that currently between the scientific, rational, and the mythological, metaphorical way of thinking about your life?
I definitely see the value in the mythological in a way I never did before watching Jordan Peterson and reading his book. But definitely in the scientific grounding of what he says when he speaks about evolutionary psychology and behavioral, what do you call it, anthropology and all of that. That's what seems to hit me the best. That's what makes the most sense to me when he starts talking in the scientific realm. Although the mythological stuff that he talks about in stories definitely add a kind of interesting color to it, because it each sort of made me look at the stories that I enjoy and the movies and video games even in a completely different way, but which is really valuable. And I do now see the value of that mythology that people started to write and tell to each other, but what they were telling it before they were writing it. But these stories that were told in order to explain a truth that they couldn't describe scientifically yet. And there still is, when science hasn't explained everything yet, there's still stories that explain things I expect that science can't yet explain.
Well, even if you go through the interviews that I did with Brett Weinstein on his channel, I think I asked him at one point. I asked him if he was not anthropomorphizing, like when he was talking about how plant produces a medicine, and he said something along the lines that a plant is experimenting with ways to interact and control its environment and to propagate itself. And I'm like, well, aren't you anthropomorphizing the plant? And he's like, well, yeah, I am, but that's the easiest way for us to communicate these ideas is to
Yeah.
anthropomorphize, like the animal and the plant, and
Yeah, to speak about organisms having intentions that
yeah,
they obviously do not have, or like if you read The Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins frequently talks about genes having their own will to do things. The gene is the
mm-hmm.
thing that's thinking how to propagate itself, but
Yeah,
he explains when he's about to go into that metaphor and how he doesn't mean it
yeah,
literally, and he goes to great pains to make sure that you understand that it is just a way of making humans understand
hmm.
how things work, is to give the things agency and tell
Yeah,
it like a story,
yeah.
which is, yeah, really interesting. I never really thought about it exactly like that. But,
Hmm. I wonder how there might be different flavors of science had it taken root in something other than the Western mindset. Like with, I wonder if there's like a Taoist way that's less personalized, and if that mode of communication, if you grow up in that culture, you can conceive of science. You take the same data, but you tell a different story because you have a different fundamental conception of the world, or if it's just inherently across the board in our brains to think, to have a theory of mind, and to give that agency to everything that we encounter in order to understand it as a system that we can influence and control.
that's something interesting. I don't know much about Taoism and other colleges, to be honest, or anthropology, but instinctively it does seem like telling stories about things as if they were humans does seem to be extremely
Mm-hmm.
effective at explaining things,
Hmm.
at least to in my experience, and for me, and the way that things are taught seems to be, uh, seems to reflect that. But again, that is just me coming from a Western mindset, so perhaps it is different in other cultures, or
Yeah, I
could have
wonder
been
if there's just
different.
different ways of thinking about that, or if that's just kind of ingrained in our consciousness. But this makes me wonder if we can start to look at all these different criticisms of Jordan Peterson as people constantly kind of saying what type of person he is and trying to interpret him and his role and as a character. Like they're giving him agency, and whether or not they're accurate will determine whether or not the article is right or not. Now, the thing is that if you're a Jordan Peterson fan, you're going to like the stories about him that, give him a positive light. And if you're not, you're going to like the stories about him that give him a negative light, or you're going to create those stories either positive or negative, but no matter what, they're always going to be a story about Jordan Peterson that you're implanting onto him as this kind of a single individual for sure, but a very, very intelligent, very blathery, very chaotic entity, even though he's rather orderly, uh,
Yeah,
supposedly with his room.
yeah, he's the being that mediates between order and chaos, as he would aspire to be.
Well, maybe that causes him to act as a magnet. Maybe what he's doing is straddling some sort of performative action that allows him to capture the imaginations, whether for good, whether in a positive or a negative light, but he's always capturing your attention. And maybe that even fuels the the fervor in which people write against him because they are enthralled with him as well, or they're trying to limit how enthralling he is by with Laurie Penny calling him a some sort of magician or quack, basically, more or less.
Yeah. Okay. There were some specific questions I wanted to discuss with you. Well, there were questions I was going to put in my own video, but then I thought, well, I wanted to talk about white men, and you're a white man, and you get these sorts of things. And I think it's something that I definitely haven't figured it out myself.
Hmm.
That perhaps in the process of talking to you, I can figure out. And it was, you might have to give me a few seconds to just get my thoughts together because I can't exactly remember what I was going to say. But it was about that section we were just talking about the her attacks. Oh, that was it. There's this whole section, that bit about white men before that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to read a little bit, if you'll bear with me. You're looking at it as well.
It's just before that. Can you give me the first sentence or so, and I'll read
I'm
along.
just trying to find it. I'm looking. This paragraph I'm reading right now is, there is nothing morally wrong with recognizing that young white guys are not coping terribly well in this frightening and uncertain world.
They suddenly find they have to share. Jesus Christ, she has such a low opinion of white men.
Yeah, that's what I was. There's a bit, and I'm trying to find it. Maybe you can help me find it as well. She says something along the lines of, like, who cares if young men are getting their feelings hurt, which just seemed completely wrong to me, and also completely expected at the same time from a feminist writer, unfortunately.
Failure to address white male pain has never been the problem. In fact, dealing with it has been the self-appointed central task of literature and culture for a great many generations. All that Peterson is doing is talking to young men about how they are feeling and offering a superstitious self-improvement program that provides an entry point for some boring, ugly, predictable ideas about race, class, and gender. I don't know exactly what she's talking about. These boring ideas that he has about race, class, and gender.
Yeah, those are just, I think that's more or less, you can just discount that as the fake news, or as false news, as my brother calls it.
Yeah.
I think the bits this is the sentence I was talking about. There are plenty of reasons why society treats the pain of young white men as a public concern. Maybe that was it. A great many of us have learned from an early age that bad things happen when white men have hurt feelings. Now, I don't like how this paragraph seems to be hinting, and maybe I'm attributing false maliciousness to Laurie Penny, but it seems like she thinks that the pain of young white men shouldn't be a public concern, as if, I mean, I know it's kind of hack to say this at this point, but can you imagine that sentence with any other group substituted for young white men? Is like, the young white men of today are the old white men of tomorrow, right? You're just talking about, forget about young, because that's just a temporary state, but she's talking about the pain of white men being a public concern, as if that's not the way things should be. And I'm not saying that it should be more of a concern than the pain of young women, but it seems like she doesn't want it to be a concern at all. That's definitely going a bit far with interpreting what she's saying, but I really didn't like this paragraph. Did not sit well with me.
I wonder the way that I read that is that young white men have had their time, and it's time for them. And this is a refrain that I see in Twitter and a lot of the social justice warrior kind of stuff. And sorry for using that phrase, but we know the group that I'm talking about, where they're like, it's time for this group to shut up and to follow and to listen, right? And we will lead now because you have led us this far. And I wonder if this isn't personal. I mean, you always, when there's this much projection, you always kind of wonder, well, is this like daddy issues with a lot of verbiage now, and sorry to say that, but
I wouldn't like to speculate.
Yeah. Or if she got hurt at a young age, but like there's something fueling her projecting this on white men. And you brought it up. I mean, if you look at the crime rates in America and you look at where the violence is happening, it's not necessarily the white men. And then we can make a bunch of justifications of why it's not that way, or and we can say, well, there's different crimes are seen in different lights. But if you just go by homicide rates, it's like, do you really want to go down that road? I don't want to go down that road, but if you do, then like the data isn't there for you and your identitarian politics. But what do you accomplish when you say that this group was so important for so long? Like, what is she trying to say? That they shouldn't have a leader, or that they're their desire for somebody to reflect their pain and to adulate their pain is somehow wrong or unnatural, or is being used by Peterson to make a bunch of money and to make a big name for himself, to ascribe negative intentions to him.
I think perhaps she's saying that Jordan Peterson is just one of many who have been preaching to young white men, and that there's really no need for another Jordan Peterson because he's just 100th in the line of other white men pleasing white men.
Yeah, she said like every 40 years somebody like this comes around. I wonder if she was talking about Robert Blythe, Onion John, or something like that. Maybe that's another. I've been reading a lot of these articles about Peterson in preparation for this.
Later in the paragraph, there's something about children of color, which anyway. Little girls are taught not to provoke their male peers into attacking or harassing them. I mean, to be honest, I think that's pretty good advice, right? Like, you shouldn't provoke people. That's, I'm not trying to victim blame here. Like, if you get attacked or harassed by someone, it's definitely, that's not your fault. That's like the person who attacks you or harasses you is to blame. And yet also teaching little girls not to provoke men is also, I think, just good advice. And teaching them not to hurt men is even better advice, I think. I don't know.
Is she necessarily advocating the opposite, or is she just saying that that's some sort of moral failing on society's fault, that they're teaching young girls not to provoke young men? But that if a young girl learns that lesson, she's still going to have to learn the lesson of not provoking the other girls, because she'll very quickly get in a lot of hot water if she does that. Either that, or she'll have to make sure that she's the dominant one that's doing all the provoking, So,
yeah, I didn't even think about it that way. That's actually true, is that as much as little girls are taught not to provoke men, they're also taught not to provoke other women. It's just how to get along with people.
Yeah.
Right? It's just how to be a good functional member of society, I think. I mean, she puts provoke in inverted commas as well. Provoke. I don't know what that means. She means like sexually provocative or like anything.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Maybe she's intonating that the woman's place is to be silent and reserved, and not to draw any attention to herself. Maybe that's the kind of the undercurrent there, either sexually or physically in another manner, or socially, just to be reserved and quiet and passive.
Yeah, I think that definitely sounds like something she would say. This can get confusing for white boys, bless their hearts, when everyone else treats your feelings as immovable facts that have to be managed by those around you. Some confusion is understandable. I thought that sentence was really funny because it sounds exactly like what a lot of men or a lot of people are complaining about feminism, treating women's feelings as, walking on eggshells around. It's really, I mean, I know it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of hack to compare of men's rights activism to feminism, but it really is just exactly the same. It's that meme of Spider-Man pointing at another Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah.
It's like whose feelings are we walking on eggshells around? Is it men or women? I hear from both sides that it's either one, but
for me that's just a stage of development. Like, when you're 2, people are going to work around your feelings but they're very going to quickly say your feelings are yours to deal with, not the world's to deal with. And I don't know if she's saying that like our society, Anglospheric society, necessarily makes the men's feelings more important than women's feelings. But if you see how our society has developed ways for both men and women to, constructively employ their feelings into productive endeavors like sports or poetry contests or debating or writing or art, all this other stuff, you see all those emotions being translated into more and more refined substances. So I think that the journey of every individual is to find ways to, take that rowdy beast that you're given when you're young, that you're supposed to ride until you're old, and figure out how to train it and put it through the paces and stuff. And that's irrespective of your gender or your class or your race. Like that's that's a process of development. And I don't think Western culture necessarily, or Anglospheric culture necessarily, lets men just do whatever they want. I don't think that that's the case.
Here's a question for you. I don't know if you like Star Trek, but I've heard from some men that they empathize a lot with Spock and with Vulcans in general because I don't know if you know, because Vulcans are what most people think is that they're like logical, they don't experience feelings, but if in the deep lore of Star Trek, the actual truth behind the Vulcans is that they have feelings that are too potent, that they're very angry, very emotional beings, and they train themselves in culture. Through the culture, they go through a sort of bar mitzvah and all of these rites of passage to force everybody in all the Vulcans to be less emotional and completely emotionless to that extent. And I've heard some men say that that is how they feel. It's like that's what growing up is to be a man, is that you have all of these feelings. I think perhaps even more than women, and you have to control them. I don't know if that's something that you can empathize with. Or...
No, I certainly can. It makes me think of one of my good friends. She's trans, and she male to female, and so she went through a period of like she has like a hormone thing that she takes to regulate her, and she was offered like different concoctions, and she was given testosterone at one point, and it just filled her with so much fury that she just didn't want to deal with it. She's like, oh yeah, I don't want to be in that zone, you know? So from that story just kind of illustrated for me that, there's something about testosterone that really drives you. Right. And so with regards to you're driven, you need to channel, you absolutely need to channel that. And there's a Neil Stevenson quote from, I think it's Cryptonomicon, when he talks about
that is so weird. A copy of Cryptonomicon just landed in front of me today, just by a weird coincidence. I've never heard of the book before. And
really?
Sorry, it's just weird synchronicity happening in my life.
It's a great. You have
to tell people about it when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great read. I'm glad that you.
Please continue.
Have a chance
what was the quote?
It's not a quote. I'm just gonna. His main character is like has a run-in with a feminist academic, and the main character is like an IT professional, and it's probably somewhat autobiographical, and the main character is thinking about like criticism about, you know, the feminist is complaining about why is there all these men that are in positions of power, and Peterson talks about this, and the guy theorizes, and I'm not saying that one way or the other, but the guy theorizes that there's something inherent within masculinity that causes you to obsess to death over one thing and to forget everything else in life but this one thing and become very myopic. And I think Peterson talks about this is that, and no, Helen, what's her name? She's the lead editor for Aereo, and Helen, I can't remember her last name. Wonderful woman.
I can't help you.
No. But you should talk to her at some point. So anyway,
if you want to see men obsessing over things in a way that women never would, you should watch some speedrunning videos of video games. Or specifically, there's a documentary on Netflix called King of Kong about two guys who you've seen it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Amazing and terrifying display of what I think is an inherently male attribute of this obsession you're talking about.
Utter obsession. And
you just wouldn't see it in women.
There were, Helen and Heather Hying were at a talk with James Damore in Portland a few months ago, and one of them made the argument that what ends up happening is that women make better choices for their lives. They think about multiple variant equations when they're making life choices. And so they privilege, you know, there's family, there's social life, there's job, there's work. And whereas men, and I do this too. I do this too. I'm like, I'm doing this one thing. Like I did 20 years. I'm a writer, you know, now I'm like, I'm a video creator. Like that's all I do. That's all I do. That's all I do. And every day I'm thinking about it constantly. Right. And to the detriment of other parts of my life, to the detriment of a lot of different things. But because I do that, like I keep on inching that one little thing that I'm doing further and further and further and further and further, where if I would have a better life if I lived more balanced, but I wouldn't proceed as far as I would with my art. And I think that is generally a male attribute. And I think that you can find evidence of that happening to people who rejigger their hormones through therapy, that they start to take on different aspects of that gendered self or that masculinity or that femininity.
I certainly think when you look at inventors or CEOs and
Yeah.
any kind of these great men, or even you could probably say army generals and lots of people, lots of men in history, they probably do have a case of this obsessiveness. Although in their case, it wasn't Donkey Kong; it was something that was actually useful that got recorded in history. But I think what you might find also is that their social lives, like you're saying, you do suffer, and it's not necessarily the best choice on an individual scale, unless you do happen to be obsessed with something that happens to be useful, like like being a great inventor, which is a very small minority of obsessions are actually useful in that way.
No, that's true, and you kind of luck out that your obsession lines up with reality, and that your skill set lines up with your obsession. And being a nice person is not required to be a great person, right? There's an inherent conflict between being good and being great. And, I think a lot of the stories, man, maybe they're mythological and maybe they're romanticized about these great inventors, these great painters, whether they're men or female, but these great people, or these people who take things to the next level, they have deep character flaws, or they don't really have a happy family life. They're not really well-rounded, but we still appreciate how they drove what they did further, which doesn't necessarily, I'm not making the case that you should be an asshole. I'm not saying that. I think that being a good person is paramount to, achieving the maximum humanity that you can in this life. But
yeah, it's definitely interesting. But going way back, actually, that was just talking about, I guess, masculinity and emotions and all of that, which is really interesting. But I guess my question to you and to myself is, how much can we consider feelings of men and of women to be important, or to be, she says, she uses the word immutable, or what does she say actually? Her feelings as immovable facts that have to be managed by those around you. Because there is an extent to which that's true. If you're friends with someone, you do have to manage their emotions to some extent. To the extent that you're close to them and that their emotional well-being impacts you, you often do have to manage. You can't just be rude to people and not care about their feelings. You do have to care about the feelings of those people around you, whether they be male or female. Although, of course, there's ways to go too far. You can be too compassionate, or you can be, on a social scale, there's repercussions for being too intrusive and too caring, of course. But I just think it's interesting that, I don't know, it's a hard balance to strike, caring about people's feelings and also about facts.
Yes, absolutely. There's a concept that's widely abused. Another one of these wonderful concepts that's widely abused, like fragility or privilege. But there's this concept that floats around. It'll probably have its heyday in about 6 months, where everybody's going to be talking about it. But I see a lot of it murmuring, and maybe it's already hit its peak. But emotional labor, right? And the concept, I believe the concept came out of women's labor advocate, and talking about, specifically, if I remember correctly, but in retail, and I've done retail, there's a certain amount of emotional labor that a waiter/waitress does.
Yeah.
Right? So the facts are the dish, and the facts are getting the order correct. But that's just the facts. And what you're doing in that job is managing expectations and giving an experience. And I think with YouTube, in the YouTube comment sphere, you can get a lot away just writing on people's emotions, right? Any sort of debate actually lends itself more to emotions than to facts. And even facts themselves are dead in the water without somebody animating them and giving like math agency, like we were talking about with storyfying. We even, if you can storyfy math, you could make a whole career just telling fairy tales that translate into mathematics, and then everybody's like, whoa, I have this, I remember this story, and then there's the equation, right? So and that's emotional labor, and we, so I don't know about there's two ways of looking at it. Like, is it my responsibility to take care of other people's emotions? Maybe, maybe not. But if I start to engage with people's emotions, what kind of opportunities are afforded me if I go down this path? And if I'm, particularly if my skill set is attuned in an emotional manner and I'm responsive to people and I can read people, or I can talk in a way that's pleasing to people, or if I can upset people in just the right way, to provoke them in just the right way, to get more attention, whatever game that I want to play is emotions. So yes, especially with the world that we're living in right now, that's plugged into the internet, that people are mismanaging with all this outrage and kind of riding these trains of outrage this way and that way and this way and that way. The responsibilities on every individual to kind of be perceptive about what they're feeling and what those feelings are prompting them to do. And if you really want to have free will, you need to develop a sense of attentiveness to all those drives and those forces that are inside of you. So, and if you want to have a good, public, persona, then you do the same thing with people, and you can incite people, and you can make fun of people, or you can use all these different emotional tools, which we could loosely call rhetoric, to get a lot of effects, and even cause people to be more considerate and thoughtful towards each other and towards themselves, which I think would be wonderful if there was more people doing that. I think there's a great market for that. And maybe that's what Jordan Peterson's giving people. He's riling them up, he's evoking them, and there's something about him that might be actually, I think overall he's doing something really good. He's opening up story to the rationalists, but he's working on a psychological level with our society, and I think he's giving us the opportunity to think about ourselves as psychological beings, atop all this gishy evolutionary engineering stuff.
Yeah, I definitely being able to do that is something that's really useful. There's a lot in what you said about the utility of playing to people's feelings, or being receptive to them at least. But I guess my question was more about the morality of it. Like, how much are we responsible for the feelings of other people, because of our actions? When, if you hurt someone's feelings, I mean, especially I think in this case with girls hurting the feelings of boys, or men and women for more adult situations, how much should women be responsible for the responses that they are triggering in men? And I'm not talking about sexual assault, or if you assault someone, that's your fault, right? Yeah. But if you reject someone, or make them angry, or if you hurt them in some way emotionally,
or lead them on,
this is what Laurie Penny, I think, is saying, that women shouldn't have to worry about that, and that however much pain you cause men, that's just male tears or something. But I don't like that. I don't.
What would that do to your social situation with your husband if that's how you proceeded? Like, what kind of life is that going to create for you if you go down that path? You can already see where that path leads.
Yeah, it's definitely not. I mean, that's definitely not the right way to go. But I think it's one of those cases where you don't want to go all the way the other way either, because you have to think about yourself as well as other people, and there's a line to tread, and there are people saying that there isn't a line, and I want.
That's really irresponsible, especially when they're trying to push public discourse in a certain way. It's one thing to live your own life in a messy relationship where you're both trampling on each other's feelings all the time. And it's another thing to try to get that to happen in the public discourse. And what's that going to eventually lead to? If you discount this whole group and you call them white men and you give them a couple other signifiers and you call them out constantly and you constantly berate them, and whenever they're together, whenever they find something that's nice that they're having fun with, be it games of any sort or inventions or whatever, you go in, you infiltrate them, you shame them, you take over the game, and then they go somewhere else, and then you follow them around, like kind of like what happened with Gamergate, and probably what she's doing here. I just not to say that maybe I did that wrong, but what's your end game? If you want to live in a productive society, and you see problems with the society, I don't know if she's clearly calling out a problem that she has, other than Jordan Peterson isn't doing things like she wants them to do, and he's using a way of thinking that she doesn't get, and he's got a bunch of followers that she doesn't like, even though she doesn't even call out them by name. Like, he don't even like these people, but who is this white male you're talking about?
Yeah, well, it's Gamergate, right? I mean, I feel like the hate on young white males in particular was started to be calcified with the Gamergate thing. I mean, just since you brought it up, I just thought I'd use it as an example, because it is this sort of, the male sphere, such as gaming, such as in gaming, yeah. There are these historical sort of things that are now being used to smear the good name of young white men.
Yeah.
And I mean, certainly you can say a lot about the young white men who become school shooters, who are the sort of what's the word, the pinnacle of white male resentment that which of course are a tiny minority. There's only a handful of men who go to those lengths, but I think a lot of people are trying to look for a seed of that behavior in the behavior of other young white men, and they're looking at these Jordan Peterson followers or Jordan Peterson fans and saying, well, are these these are just sort of micro versions of a incel school shooter or mass murderer.
This is an alt-right movement waiting to happen, if it's not already alt-right, or whatever your enemy phrase is for the big thing. And you know what, I wonder because I know that there's a lot of people into gaming. It's not just white males. Like, Asians love it, and I'm sure there's a huge swath of like actually African American and Black population that just loves games. And maybe games is a medium where race doesn't matter, where all that stuff goes out the window, and it's truly well, not perfectly, but it's pretty damn meritocratic, right? Is that how you say that? Right?
I think, yeah. And if you can call being good at video games a merit, I mean, I'm not saying it's not, but we talked about King of Kong earlier.
I so hope when this video comes out, you really are wearing a low top.
I promise I'm not. I'm wearing my Star Trek native T-shirt, which that was just a stupid, weird earth tones and a strange peasant style. You'll get it when you watch the video.
but it seems like whenever there's an activity that all these identity categories dissolve, that really undermines the people who find a lot of power and a lot of money and profit from exploiting those divisions, right? So they go in, they infiltrate gaming, let's say, and say it's sexist and it's racist and all this stuff in order to break it up because it somehow threatens them. I'm throwing that out there. I just wonder if that's another angle too, because I feel a lot of envy with the stuff going against Peterson, the stuff against white males, and just the stuff that we're kind of generally talking about. There's a lot of envy. There's a lot of people who were taught that their ideas are they go to school and they get these communications degrees with a heavy dose of postmodernist feminist theory. They're taught that they are so important. They're taught that they're going to change the world, that they deserve to change the world, that they're righteous. They get out there, they see all the attentions going all these different directions, and they feel kind of disenfranchised themselves. Like, wait, I was the center of the world. I was the one who was catered to. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. Although, to be honest, I can't feel too bad about Laurie Penny. Like I said, she does make occasional TV appearances, and she, this, I didn't actually mention, but the reason this article came to my attention is because an author I really enjoy called Neil Gaiman. I don't know if you've ever read any of his sort of science fiction, fantasy, really good work. Sandman I just finished reading, absolutely excellent.
Yeah.
And I was actually, because I was watching Jordan Peterson at the same time as reading Sandman, and I saw a lot of parallels there with the mythological thinking. And I kind of, when we went to the first Jordan Peterson talk I went to, Hugh Laurie was in the audience. And not only was it exciting to be in the same room as Hugh Laurie, but it was also exciting that Hugh Laurie likes Jordan Peterson. That was really exciting for me. And then, like, after that, I started having this, like, secret hope that all of the famous people that I like could be Jordan Peterson fans, you know. So I was like, Neil Gaiman, I have no reason to believe that he likes Jordan Peterson, but for some reason I just thought that he might, you know, there was a secret hope that he did. And then he tweeted this article saying that he thought it was funny and on point, and that he really loved it. And I don't know, I wasn't happy about that, because I don't know how much he knows about Jordan Peterson, if he's read his book or if he's watching these videos, or if he's just picking up all of this stuff from the media and he's just reading articles like this. But I can't remember where I started this now, but it was just a bit disappointing for me that he liked this article. Well, of course he's entitled to like whatever articles he wants, obviously. Do you remember where I got onto that point? About, Laurie Penny's doing fine. She's being tweeted by Neil Gaiman. That's something that would make me delighted. So I don't know. She shouldn't be envious of Jordan Peterson. She's doing great.
Yeah, I wonder if she's doing great. And I wonder what she's building up to. I wonder if she is trying to create something, or if she's simply a critic, a cultural critic, which is great. That's what I end up doing with my time now. But I hope that I'm trying to make connections instead of call people out for the fact that they're cutting connections. That's what I'm criticizing. I'm criticizing what she's doing because I don't think it's productive. Just to quote her here, that's how we got to a position where male pain is intolerable, but everyone else's pain is par for the course. I'm throwing truth bombs, but you're crying victim. Fuck your feelings, make gentle, empathetic love to mine. Like, that's what she's saying that young white men are thinking. And
I think that's what she's saying. But that's completely out of touch, to be honest. To say that nobody cares about female pain or the pain of colored people, as she called people of color. Sorry, that's the completely correct way of saying it, isn't it? Yeah, she sounds completely out of touch saying that nobody cares about the pain.
Well, that's her position. That's always been her position. It always will be her position. That's what her position's founded on, is that nobody cares about women, and her job is to make people care about women. Like, that's her job. So if she goes and says,
job, then you're going to have a reason for why your job exists. So
yeah, exactly.
I'm not surprised that she thinks that.
She would, if she came to the realization that sexism doesn't exist, she would have to completely reinvent her. Unless she's doing something other than wailing on sexism, she would have to go and do something else. If she admitted that maybe sexism isn't that big of a deal right now, maybe there's bigger problems than that, then I can't write these, however many word columns. I mean, it's literally on longreads.com, so 5,000.
It's, you get to about halfway and you think, this is a long article if I stop now, and then there's just more. Yeah, well, fair enough. She's, I go on long rants as well.
Yeah, we're allowed to do that. I mean, what else are we going to do with all of our time and everybody else's attention, but to captivate it for as long as possible? It just seems like she's just kind of going through the paces here. Yeah,
just for the record, I think she's not exactly just a feminist, although she definitely is a feminist. She's also a Labour supporter, and I think maybe I'm not being fair to her because I haven't done enough research into her, but I believe she's also an advocate for other other kinds of social change. So she could always go back to class struggle if feminism became a closed book.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. We'll always have class to land
There's always going to be hierarchies, as Jordan Peterson says, so there's always going to be a need for people to look out for the little guy, and that's I wish you would do that.
To make themselves big by collecting all the little people under them. I just found a book called Everything Belongs to the Future by her, and the blip verb is, time is a weapon wielded by the rich, who have excess of it, against the rest, who must trade every breath of it against the promise of another day's food and shelter. And then she writes all these articles, so she's basically talking to the rich who have all this leisure time to go through her
long reads,
her long reads. So, what is she doing? You're undermining yourself, or either that or you're making bread and butter shaming people because, like that masochistic tendency is alive and well.
Yeah, I don't think, among the other faults of this article, I think it is not written by someone who values my time. It could, she makes a lot of points, but I think they probably could have been summarized maybe to 2/3 of the length. at least.
Yeah, I mean, I get that criticism too when my videos go longer than 10 minutes and 1 second, but I'm
Yeah,
exaggerating, but still. I do some
yeah.
long things that I could, like there's that quote, and I always people like, why is this so long? And like I just quote that quote where I would have written a shorter letter if I had the time.
Yeah, I was about to say that,
You know?
Yeah, I love that quote. I do. I think that all the time. I don't know if you respond to your YouTube comments much, but I try to make my
Hmm.
reply shorter than the thing I'm replying to.
Hmm. You
Always.
distill it. That's why I like
But
Twitter.
that takes
Like,
ages. It takes a long time to
yeah,
do that, actually.
yeah. I'll spend like 20 minutes on a tweet just going over every word, and then I'll post it, and I'll see that there was a typo.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
So what's
Any other
next for you then?
parts for me?
Yeah.
Uh,
Are
I don't
you
know. I
are you developing something with what do you think you're are you building something with all this research into this phenomena of Jordan Peterson? Like, are you getting a sense of some sort of cultural zeitgeist, or are you kind of subconsciously, if you're conscious of it, like building some sort of project out of this line of inquiry?
I'm just following it. I'm just doing what interests me. I think calling it research is really giving me too much credit. But I, this is going to make me sound like a religious zealot or something. But
Hmm.
when I first started getting into Peterson, I don't know if this was your experience as well, but the first between the first 2 months and the first 3 months, I was, you could say, like borderline obsessed with his
Hmm.
videos. With what he was saying, it was so interesting to me,
Hmm.
and I was like addicted to it.
Hmm.
And I finally understood why, in the Bible, I was raised on Bible stories about the stories of Jesus and the disciples packing up their lives and just, following Jesus around to see what he says next,
Hmm.
and going
Mm-hmm.
to these towns and, sitting in the crowds and helping out Jesus with being his roadie, basically.
Yeah.
And I really understood, like, if if I lived in Nazareth, or wherever Jesus lived, and uh,
Hmm.
Jordan Peterson came around and started telling me to clean up my room, and if I listened to him for a few hours, I probably would be like, yeah, I'm going to follow this guy to the next town, see what he says next. Like that would be, I'd definitely
Effectively
be
giving up
disciple.
your room so you don't have to clean it anymore by becoming
I'm going to
homeless.
clean up my backpack,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
yeah,
Hmm.
but that's it's really powerful. I think this stuff. I'm less obsessed now. I'm more
Yeah.
grounded, looking at other things and reading other people, and
Yeah.
just sort of checking out Jordan Peterson stuff on the sidelines. Now I'm more obsessed with the backlash, because
Yeah.
he's hit this point where there's a new article talking about either why he's dangerous, or why he's just merely stupid.
Or he's
And
important. I mean, every 3 days there's a positive one on him.
oh, of course, yeah. I mean, I like the positive ones as well, but I'm fascinated with the
Hmm.
negative ones, because
Yeah.
I don't understand why they care so much.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's just popular, and if he's
Hmm.
stupid, then who cares? Like, if he's nobody wrote articles about why, how Breaking Bad was, like, how lots of young white men like Breaking Bad now.
Hmm.
Oh, young white men are watching Rick and Morty. Like, I nobody cares. It's fine. Like, they can just like that if they want.
Hmm.
Like, why does it matter if they like Jordan Peterson? Why does it matter that Jordan Peterson is
Hmm.
popular? If you
Mm-hmm.
don't like him, then just don't like him. If you don't like what he says, then you can argue against that, which is
Yeah.
fine. But Laurie Penny isn't doing that. And I see a lot of articles that aren't even arguing against his points. They're just arguing about
His
his,
character.
oh, he's like full of mumbo jumbo, and he talks about the Bible all the time.
Yeah.
Like, oh, by the way, none of what he says makes sense if like, it's just,
Huh.
I don't understand it. Why they go into such trouble. And I think
Yes.
it just,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, they also end up insulting people by saying he's the stupid person's philosopher, right?
Mhm.
They're really vindictive.
Yeah, very snobby.
Yeah, very very elitist, very snobby, and I think that goes back again to the ability for him to resonate with people, and not necessarily. And I wonder about that. I think that your case, it's anecdotal for you. Like you got obsessed with him, and then he moved on to these other things. For me, I found him before he got embroiled in the big thing, and I just started going through his. Over the summer, I had a lot of free time, and I went through and he caused me to start looking at my life and kind of like really investigate my value system and my patterns of behavior. And, instead of just worrying about them and running from them, to turn around and to face where I was,
Yeah.
So he sparked that in me. But he also started talking about things that I've been interested in for a very long time. And he was doing it right. He was doing mythology right. And secretly I'm like, okay, finally people are going to be interested in mythology, because that's all I really want to write, is the stuff that, there's that, there's hard science fiction, and there's high fantasy, but what I'm obsessed with is deep fantasy, like the Silmarillion, and the ancient Greek myths, like where all the really intense, powerful primary colors of the story painting set are. And he's giving people access to that now. He talks about Pinocchio every fucking time he talks, which is fine. I wish he'd get up beyond that, but that's.
I think he's taking a break from Pinocchio. He doesn't talk about it as much as he used to.
Not as much, but he still brings it up. There's something's got to pop out of a belly of a well. Like
oh yeah, the whale is like.
You know?
Yeah, I don't know if you watched. I watched Pinocchio again. I went back to it after Peterson kept going on about it. I'm like, what is this guy going on about? I remembered it from when I was a child watching it, but that whale, what do you call it, imagery, the whale scenes, they really are quite what do you call it, gruesome. They're very affecting.
Yeah,
they're not exactly like, obviously it's a children's film. They're not violent, but they're very
fierce.
What's the word? Impactful. They stick with you. I think yeah. And the kind of pathetic Geppetto goes a little bit he gets a little bit soft when he's in the whale, and he doesn't want to leave, and he's too scared to leave. And Pinocchio, the child, his son, is now the one who says, no, we have to leave. You can't just stay in the whale, you stupid old man. You can't stay in it. Yeah, you should go back and watch it. It's great.
Have you been through a period of your life like that, where you were kind of like, you felt old and spent and at the end of your rope and just in the belly of the whale that swallowed you when you were younger?
I've been very blessed in my life, and I'm saying that I would knock on wood if I was superstitious, but I've been incredibly lucky in my life. And of course there's been the normal puberty years where it's a little bit awkward, and bad things happening, and personal relationships, and trying to figure out all this stuff about emotional the emotions of the people around you, and how much you're responsible for other people, doing that sort of thing. But I've had no real belly of the whale moments yet, and I'm just trying to Noah's Ark style prepare myself as best as possible for what I expect will be a difficult life to in the future, because what life is easy. There's got to be some difficulties in store for me that I'm just trying to prepare for.
That's
I don't know about you.
That's wise. No, I've
You're a bit older than me.
Maybe a bit. I don't know. Probably a bit more than a bit. But yeah, I've been in a few whales, and like when you were talking about the young boy comes to the old man and says, "Get off your rocker, we got to go." Like I had a moment where like I've done that with myself. Like where a new idea comes along and rouses me from the monstrosity that was the old idea that I'm stuck in, and so the new idea becomes the new mode of transport into the next era. It's just it's an interesting process to be stuck in that belly, and kind of looking at life through a bunch of fascia, and pulsing, writhing entrails and stuff like that, and then be woken up by that vital young boy, that Pagelia. What's her name? Camille Paglia.
Camille Paglia.
Paglia, yeah. I've been going through her book, Sexual Personae, which is, I'm going to say this, and pardon me for saying this, but it's like somebody giving you a blowjob with mythology. It's just so freaking erotic and sensual. And plus I'm listening to it on audiobook, and it's just like she's talking about genitals and like one god going around. No, it's read by some, British woman. She's just like pouring all this, imagery over me. It's a very intense experience, but she talks about the beautiful boy in one passage. and just like the mythological aspect of the beautiful boy, or that young vitality, that kind of like in a sense, metaphorically, like this sperm that just has to go. It just has to go. It has to go forward. Even if that forward's crooked and erratic and spastic and stochastic, it has to go. And it's naive and it's innocent. It's just, it could be completely destructive, self-destructive, or it doesn't care. It just like goes and just penetrates whatever it can penetrate. But when you ride that, I ride that part, and then I get old and tired, and I start to doubt myself, and I kind of look at myself and I feel bad and I feel guilty, and I'm like, I'm not that thing anymore, and I stop and I have to detach myself, and I go through a fallow period where I'm kind of pathetic, and maybe not even pathetic, but I'm certainly hollow, and I feel like I don't have a personality anymore. I don't have any vitality, and then that comes back. When I just go through that process. So it seems like a
through
cycle.
a cycle. Like, is this like, what is this, every day, every
No,
year?
no.
Like, how often do you go through these?
I mean, it depends. I think there's smaller cycles and they're bigger cycles, but probably every 6 to 12 months. Like I'm just getting through that kind of taking a break period where I did, like, I started with this evergreen story, and I just did a video every 2 or 3 days, and then like when summer hit, I just got some information and I started looking at myself. I'm like, I'm not fresh. I'm not juicy anymore. I'm kind of parroting myself, and I can tell, I can hear that. And so I just kind of went through this period of like really doubting and distancing myself from myself. And now I feel alive again. I feel like, okay, let's get to work. I don't know what the work is yet. I mean, I have to make this freaking documentary, but looking for that new idea, I want to burn myself out again.
Yeah, it's good. I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
This question of coming back to the article, and a lot of other people who've said that Jordan Peterson's audience are predominantly male, and Jordan Peterson says that could be just YouTube. But I actually do think there's something to this, kind of what you're talking about. Not exactly that, but I think men do go through, especially between sort of 20 and 30, this incredible growth in taking responsibility for their lives, and all of the stuff that Jordan Peterson talks about, that I think is really helpful advice. But I think it's especially really helpful advice for men of that age. I don't know if that's something you can speak to, but I feel like I don't know that many women, to be honest, and that's something I'd like to rectify, because I really do enjoy the company of women, but I don't think they like me as much as I like them. And
really,
I find it easy to make.
Is that what you think?
I find it easy to make friends with men, and since I work in a mostly male environment now, it's hard to meet women. But I have some female friends, and I really like talking to them. But I think the process of growing up is different for men and women, and that's not to say that it's necessarily easier for women. But I think Jordan Peterson and his obsession with the hero archetype and all this responsibility, it does help men a lot, and it's also good advice for women. But I think men are crying out for it at the moment. These men you're talking about, the ones that don't have any direction and they don't know which way, the sperm spastic directionless thing, it doesn't know which way to go, and I think young men, they need to get their teeth into something. They need something to be passionate about and to work towards, especially young men, but women as well. But that's something that, for instance, ISIS seems to harness in young men, to give them something to believe in and to work for and to die for. They're just.
I thought you were talking mythologically, but you're talking politically. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the Islamic State. I know you're supposed to call them Daesh, right? Because that's what they hate being called, apparently.
I don't know.
You've heard that?
They're closer to you than me. I'm very far away from them.
Apparently they like to be called ISIS, but if you want to really put up a middle finger to ISIS, you have to call them Daesh, Daesh, which means like to crush, but it's also an acronym for something else. I don't remember. Anyway, yes, I should have called them Daesh so that you wouldn't get confused with mythological ISIS. But yeah,
on kind of a similar vein, to go back to what I was saying about why I think these articles against Peterson they're disappointing. or like this sort of feminist critical theory stuff is disappointing. It's like, if you're jealous of the guy, why don't you provide a counter story? Why don't you erect some, or resurrect, let's say, erect is the wrong word, resurrect some old, the feminine mythology. Like, where's the feminine mythology? If you really want to empower young women in the way that Jordan Peterson is empowering young men, like, tell them a story. What's the best story? And I wonder if necessarily and I brought this up, and you did something amazing in our first talk, but I brought up how I thought that the feminine imagination is more novelistic, and that the emergence of the complexity of the female brain requires a larger format than the very distilled mythological form. So I wonder, like, women read a lot of romance novels, so maybe the romance is somehow connects with the woman's mythological framework. And that's, if you want to excite a bunch of women, you write 50 Shades of Grey, but nobody's you don't see thousands and thousands of people writing these huge long articles against 50 Shades of Grey.
I think there are some, actually, to be honest. I mean, what? I think there are some articles, talking about how 50 Shades of Grey is romanticizing abusive relationships and all of that sort of thing. It's not like there's no backlash, but I think, to be honest, feminism is the story that Laurie Penny and others are telling to women, and it is very compelling, unfortunately, this radical feminism of men against women and all sorts of, I think, pretty harmful messages. Although there is some good stuff in there, if I'm being honest, although that will upset a lot of my audience to say that. It's not completely bonkers, the idea of feminism. It's just that a lot of it, the stories that they're telling, they're unfortunately, I think, not accurate, and they're dangerous, but it is compelling. That is the counter argument that feminists are putting forward at the moment.
And do you think it's fair to call that the victim narrative? Would that be fair to call it that?
Yeah,
or
it's a victim narrative.
Yeah.
It's one of them. And I wish it was a bit more of a inspiring hero narrative, rather than just the first half of the story with the victim and the downtrodden, Oliver Twist or something. I wish
Green
it would,
Gables.
Yeah, sure, I haven't read that one, but I wish there was a rise, a Batman Begins of feminism, something for women to look up to and aspire to. Yeah, and maybe that is 50 Shades of Grey. I hope not. I hope women can aspire to more than just marrying a millionaire.
Yeah. That probably goes into some very deep-seated or seated biological influences when you get into, I want to marry a millionaire and please him sexually and get a little bit of roughed around, but I will always be contained within his uber womb of fancy cars and high-rise glass and his eternal devotion. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the problem with the victim narrative, is that if you stake your political power on promulgating the victim narrative, then you don't want to tell the full cycle of the narrative, right? And the victim conquers or overcomes the problem, and then either becomes a ruler or kind of goes through a period of death and rebirth, right? So either you get in charge and everything's great, or you fail and you have to try again, right? But if your whole political narrative is to sink in and to tell that juicy part of the story that you're oppressed, you are oppressed. You're oppressed because of this part of you, and you're oppressed because of that part of you. People will start listening to you, and you can get addicted to that attention. But if you start to tell people how to stop being oppressed, you're going to lose all that attention you gained, right? You're going to lose your audience because you're going to give them the tools to go on their way. Which I think Jordan Peterson, I'm going to give him big props for. I think that he wants people to go forth from him. I don't think he wants people to stay on him. That's not the sense that I get, and I think that comes from his being a therapist. Like, I'm here to get you to not need me anymore.
A good doctor doesn't want to see you ever again.
Yeah,
after he's done with you.
Exactly.
And I don't think feminism is a good doctor.
Yeah, I don't think it's a good doctor. the great
I wonder
mother.
if Jordan Peterson is, because although he's, as interesting as he is and as wise as he is, he's human after all, and he must be enjoying his fame to some extent.
Oh yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, who wouldn't? Having the attention of so many people and having a book tour, and to receive that constant positive reinforcement he gets from the people who tell him that he's changed their lives. That must make him feel good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I just hope that
it might help him take the criticism that he receives and allow the criticism to kind of stabilize him. But unfortunately, the criticism like this piece it's not even beneficial. It doesn't tell him what he could be doing better. Maybe there's something that he could learn to refine himself. And I see him refining himself. That's also why I trust him, because I see him making mistakes, refining himself, changing his behavior for the better. But yeah, I mean, people on my channel, every once in a while, somebody was like, you're going to have like 100,000 subscribers or whatever. I'm like, I'm not ready for that. I want 24,000, but the more attention I get, like I'm worried about how rickety it gets. Like the higher and higher you get, like the more likely it is people.
I think Laurie Penny's gonna write a 5,000 word article about you one day.
Yeah, I wonder. Like, you know what? I think about that when I'm tweeting right now. Like I'll do these tweets and I'll think of a good idea. I'm like, okay, at some point, if I do get big, people are going to be going through my stuff. So I need to be careful. Yeah. I need to be careful, So it might happen, but like it's not. That's not the same feeling as when I was 25 and dreaming in my head of receiving an award for writing like the best book in the world. Like having these fantasies of people like coming up and asking me, well, why did you write this and what were you meaning and all this stuff. Like that fantasy is different than like, okay, I'm getting bigger, but I need to build this thing smartly. It's more constructive and less imaginary, and maybe that has something to do with where I am at life and the amount of whale belliness I've experienced has tempered me.
Yeah, well, I hope so, because otherwise, what's the point in whale belliness?
Well, just bathe in all those digestive juices. It's good for the constitution.
Been the two of us meet